Welcome to the channel. In today's video, I'm going to do a cartridge review, and a cartridge I've never talked about. In front of me is the 280 Remington. So I'm going to talk about its history, its performance, and why it's a good cartridge, but a bit overlooked. So let's go ahead and get into it. The 280 Remington was introduced by Remington in 1957. Now, it had a pretty rough start, I believe, for a couple reasons. Number one, it was introduced in the 50s, and up until that time, not until around the 60s, 7mm wasn't really popular at all until the 7mm Rem mag. So Americans just weren't really shooting 7mm cartridges. And the next thing was, at its introduction, it was an extremely mild shooting cartridge. What I mean by mild is the velocities were nothing special. In fact, the parent case, the 30-06, which the parent case to this is the 30-06, and the 280 Remington's brother, the 270 Winchester, you could say both outperformed it at its introduction. And so it really struggled with popularity, I think, for those two reasons, that it's a 7mm cartridge, and people were wondering, why on earth would I get a 280 Remington when my 270 does better, or my 30-06 shoots better? It had such a rough start that in 1978, to try to boost sales for this, Remington renamed it the 7mm06 Remington. Now, that didn't really work, so a couple years later, in the 80s, they named it the 7mm Remington Express. And with improvements with powder, the 7mm Remington Express, which was the exact same thing as the 280 Remington, was able to shoot about 100 feet per second faster than the velocities when it was introduced in the late 50s. And so it became a bit more viable. But people were getting a little confused because Remington's probably most popular cartridge at the time in 7mm was the 7mm Rem mag. And so people were getting a little bit confused on which one was which, because they're both called the 7mm Rem. So Remington renamed it the 280 Remington a couple years after that. So, and to this day, since the 80s, it's the 280 Remington. Let's go ahead and look at its performance. Okay, 139 grain bullet, really 140. It's going 3,000 feet per second, so it's pretty darn good. The 150 grain class bullets are going 2,900 feet per second. Let's get into a little bit bigger. The 162 grain is going 2,800, and it can shoot a 175. And it does it at 2,700 feet per second. So you could say this is a little bit more versatile than a 270 Winchester, but a little bit slower than a 30-06. Now, before I show you the ballistics, and I do actually want to compare it to the older cartridges, to the 270 and the 30-06, let's just go ahead and look at all three of them next to each other. And hopefully you can guess which one's which. Going from my left is the 270 Winchester, in the middle is the 280 Remington, and then that's the 30-06 on the right. So, now the 280 Remington, I would say more copies the 270 Winchester, as that case overall length is 2.540 inches, the same as the 270, while the 30-06 cartridge or case length is 2.494 inches. Okay, before I show you the ballistics for the 280 Remington, I just want to load up all three of these cartridges, so the 270, 280, and the 30-06, with a 150 grain AccuBond. Now, the BC is going to be different for each one, so it's not going to be a completely fair comparison, but I thought it would still be fun to see, since they all shoot a 150 grain bullet, to see which one comes out on top at 400 yards. So let's go ahead and get into it. The 280 Remington with a 150 grain AccuBond, it has a respectable BC of 0.493, And with the Nosler reloading book, the velocities are a little more than what Hornady says. So, you could get 2950 feet per second according to Nosler. And then that energy is almost 2,900 foot-pounds. The recoil is 20 foot-pounds of recoil with an 8-pound rifle. And let's just take this out to 400, and it's going 2,200 feet per second. Energy is a little more than 1660 foot-pounds of energy. And then if we can just remember the drop, this one drops 25.77 inches when zeroed at 100. All very respectable, would be very good for big game hunting. The 270 with the 150 grain AccuBond, it will have the highest BC out of the three, obviously, with a BC of 0.500. Muzzle velocity of 2,900 feet per second, and the energy is just a little bit less than the 280 Remington at 2,800 foot-pounds, but almost, well, within 100 foot-pounds. Recoil is surprisingly about the same, maybe even a tad bit more, surprisingly. Out to 400 yards. This is so close to the 280 Remington. So it's going 2,200 feet per second, and then the energy is just a little bit less at 1612 foot-pounds of energy at 400. And then it's also not as flat, surprisingly, as the 280 Remington. So it has 26.78 inches of drop, so about an inch difference. On to the granddaddy of them all, 30-06 Springfield, with the lowest BC of 0.435, but it also has the highest velocity at 3,025 feet per second. Muzzle energy of 3,000, almost 3,050 foot-pounds. The recoil is also going to be the most, but not a huge difference between them. Out to 400 yards, again, right there with the 270 and the 280, around 2,200 feet per second. And then the energy just barely beats out the 270, but a little bit below, maybe about 50 foot-pounds below the 280. But it is the flattest shooting, technically. Now, is there a huge difference between them all? Not really, but thought that'd be fun to show. So how does the 280 Remington do in the current 2022 hunting realm? Well, I wouldn't use the word popular because I don't think it is, but I would say it's relevant. Uh, I think it's struggled even to this day because of the 280 actually improved, because the 280 AI is, well, it's a little bit better version of this. And then the very popular 7mm Rem Mag has kind of overshadowed most of the 7mm cartridges. So I kind of think for a lot of people that really like 7mm, if they're going to step up from a 7mm 08, they're just either going to go to the 280 AI or the 7mm Rem Mag. Is it a viable big game cartridge? Absolutely. So there is actually ammo for it. It's not extremely popular, so it still stays on the shelf. So that's kind of nice. It kind of reminds me of the 300 WSM. It's popular enough that manufacturers are making it, but it's not popular enough that people are snatching it up right as it comes on the shelf. So that's a nice thing. I think as a big game cartridge, it's very similar to its parent case, the 30-06, in that it's a versatile cartridge that gets the job done, but it's not flashy. It's not as fast as the 7mm Rem Mag, and it's not as efficient as the 7mm 08. But you know what? It can do it all. So I do think this cartridge is more versatile than the 270 Winchester, just because you can shoot up to 175 grain bullets. 270, you can't do it just yet. Who knows? Hopefully that changes. And then I think it is a little more versatile than the 7mm 08 because it's shooting the same bullets just a little bit faster. So I think this cartridge, I'm not sure what its future entails. I think it will kind of stay where it is, where it's relevant but not popular.